More than 200 Venezuelans illegally crossed into Ecuador Tuesday in an attempt to flee economic instability in their home country. Hundreds of Venezuelans have also fled to Brazil, a move which was met with violent opposition from locals. This comes as the Venezuelan government devalued its currency to mitigate its economic crisis and combat rampant inflation. Katie Watson, with our partners at the BBC, has the latest.
Getting out any way they can. Venezuelan migrants nestle among the cars on this truck. It's their way of getting to the Ecuadorian border. Others simply walk, taking with them any belongings they can. But Ecuador has tightened its migration rules. Peru later this week will do the same. Many now fear they'll be stranded. Anthony and his family have only just arrived in Colombia. He used to work as a taxi driver but couldn't make ends meet.
The situation in Venezuela is critical, and now President Maduro is removing zeros from the currency. I can guarantee you things will get worse. This is one of the main reasons I had to leave.
They're headed for Peru. Anthony has a passport, but his wife and daughter don't.
It is horrible. I'm just really sad because I had to leave all my family behind and I can't get them out of the country. You can't live there anymore.
Like many desperate Venezuelans, all they can do is hope that soon the borders will be open again.
Geoff Ramsey is the Assistant Director of the Washington Office on Latin America's Venezuela program. He joins us now to discuss the latest there. Geoff, thanks for being with us. Can you explain exactly what Maduro is trying to do with this new economic plan?
Sure. So, I think the Maduro government is trying to get the economy out of its tailspin and get hyperinflation under control. But I think the real problem that it's facing is that this plan to lop off 5 zeros off the new currency is backed by pegging the new currency to this cryptocurrency that isn't seen as particularly credible. Also, the biggest problem with the government's economic plan is that it doesn't have much buy-in from the private sector, and it's unclear how the government is going to try to seek more private investment to be able to turn things around.
So it sounds like there are still a lot of questions over this economic plan. So what has the impact been so far?
Well, there's been widespread anxiety amongst Venezuelans on the ground. There have been reports that although the country was largely quiet on Monday due to a bank holiday, things didn't exactly kick into gear today. The opposition did call for a national strike to protest the announcements. But what we saw was, rather than widespread participation in this strike, people not turning out to shop or carry out their daily purchases just due to widespread confusion about the extent of the economic reform.
Any kinds of run on the banks? Are people trying to get their money out before it changes into some kind of cryptocurrency that they don't know what to do with?
Well, we haven't really seen much of a run on the banks. I think so far, I think people are willing to sort of give this a chance because they're desperate. I mean, people are sick of widespread shortages of basic good and medicine. But I do think that as questions build about this new economic measure and whether or not it's going to be successful, I think that's going to put increasing pressure on the Maduro governments to resolve its fundamental economic problems, as well as to resolve the political crisis.
How have things gotten so bad? I mean, we remember not that long ago, Venezuela was one of the Latin American success stories, one of the, wealthiest countries in Latin America. How did this happen so quickly?
Yeah, well, I think it's two things, really. The first is that, the Venezuelan economy is built on oil. They don't actually produce much of anything else. So their economy is fundamentally linked to the price of oil. And as oil prices have fallen down from over $120 a barrel, Now they're around 60, 65. That's put a real crunch on the economy and on the government. The other is just plain economic mismanagement. Frankly, the government hasn't really invested in anything else, and they haven't really even carried out some of the investment that they need to do in the oil sector to make it more productive. So oil prices have fallen, and the production of oil has fallen as well. Actually, in February, the United States imported more oil from neighboring Colombia than it did from Venezuela, which is surprising considering Venezuela has the world's largest oil reserves.
And how is Maduro framing the crisis? He's blaming the U.S. to some extent, isn't he?
He is. The government continues to portray the economic crisis as the result of some kind of international conspiracy or an economic war, as Maduro calls it. And they're trying to pin all of the blame on the United States, and most recently on the fact that the United States has implemented financial sanctions as of August of last year that make it much harder for the Venezuelan government to get access to credit.
Now, there's also been an influx of Venezuelans, a huge exodus. How is this impacting both their Latin American neighbors, and internally, how are they addressing this?
Well, internally in Venezuela, the response, has been pretty abysmal. The Venezuelan government really hasn't met the needs of Venezuelans who are seeking to flee because of the economic crisis. There's long lines and bottlenecks to access passports and other documents. So there's actually now a raging black market for passports. Venezuelans are actually paying between $1,000 and $1,500 to get access to a passport, which is a lot of money in a country where the minimum wage is something like $5 a month. And internationally, the flow of Venezuelan migrants and refugees around the region has stoked xenophobia. In recent days, we've seen attacks on Venezuelan migrants in Brazil and also in Ecuador and even Peru. This is a crisis that is spilling over into the rest of the hemisphere.
And Geoff, in your expert opinion, having studied this country as in so much detail as you have, what do you think needs to happen both immediately and long term to turn around this crisis?
Yeah, so what I think needs to happen is the international community needs to come together and pressure all stakeholders in the crisis, so that's the Venezuelan government and the opposition, to engage in serious, committed negotiations to restore the country's democratic institutions. I think we need to see much more consensus from the United States, the European Union, as well as the rest of Latin America, that the only way out of this crisis lies in some kind of mediated, negotiated solution.
Geoff Ramsey, thank you so much for your expertise on Venezuela. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you.